grids. But what is more important is that where we should really be smart, that is where we combine them. We should combine, we should see what the one can do better than the other and how they can help one another and how we can convert the energy from one sector to another, and then try to be as smart, as affordable and doable in the way that we look for 100% renewable energy. We have been promoting the concept since 12 and also defined it in the book there, and we also made a review paper where you can see how this gained into the scientific literature, this way of using this concept here. Now, why is it important? Why is it important to take this coherent and integrated look? I'll just highlight some of it. One thing I believe why it is important is because of the cost structure of storage. There's a huge difference what it will cost you if you try to store electricity, here defined as electricity in, electricity out, compared to if you can design your system so that you can store heat in, heat out, or gas, green gas, gas in, gas out, or liquid fuel. It's approximately 100 times more expensive in terms of investment cost to store electricity than it is to store heat. And that again is more expensive than storing gas and storing liquid fuel. And it doesn't really matter what's technology, if it's the battery or pumped hydro or whatever, it's more or less the same order of magnitude. Now I compared the cost I'm using here a little bit to the cost that Professor Breyer used in his lecture some days ago, and I also discussed it a little bit with him. I here use 175 euro per kilowatt hour, while the current costs, according to Professor Breyer, is a little higher. Right now it's maybe around 250, depending on a little bit on the technology, but on that order of magnitude. And he expects those costs to come down, and when he makes his scenario, and he told me that he was expecting it to come down to around 75. That is, of course, a steep decrease from 250 to 75, but still, in my view, it's still much more costly than storing heat and gas and liquid fuel. And this just tells me and all of us that if we can design the system in a way so we can integrate heating and cooling and electricity and all this, so we can store the energy in terms of thermal storage, gas storage, or liquid fuel storage, then it's so much more affordable for us to store the big amounts of energy. Of course, if it's every day, then a battery could be good, but if the big amounts of energy, the seasonal and so on, then this is the way to go. If you want to read more about the costs and where it comes from, you can go to this paper here. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is the infrastructure, the grid. And I made this diagram here for the Danish debate because in Denmark we were debating in this a little bit like that the electricity grid is the most important grid in Denmark, and we can do almost with that solely, and we don't have to really consider the other grids. But that is far from the truth. What this diagram here shows is that in terms of peak capacity, that hour where the grid delivers the most energy to the houses and the industries and so on, the electricity grid is by far not the most important. It delivers in Denmark around 6,000 megawatt in that hour where it delivers most, and have stayed that for the past 10 years or even more. If you compare that to our natural gas grid, it actually delivers more than the double in the peak hour. And if you put all our district heating grids together, they also together deliver twice as much as our electricity grid. So this just tells me that we should maybe make use of all the grids we already have, and if we do that, then it's much more affordable to go, and it also will cost us a lot of money if we thought of imagine that we can disregard the gas and the heating, district heating or district cooling in some countries, and then go 100% for electricity grid. That will cost a lot of money. If you look into how much it costs, then the cost of electricity grid is extremely expensive, especially if you go to the distribution grids. And it's more expensive than the district heating, and it's more expensive than the gas if you look on how much energy it can carry. I'll come back to this a little bit, but I'll just take a little detour here in one of the national scenarios we have made on how to go to 100% renewable energy in Denmark, and we started doing that in 2006, and this is one of the recent scenarios where we're looking at the 100% renewable energy scenario. What we found is, I mean, from a technical point of view, this is doable, and also from resources. We can put up enough wind turbines and find enough biomass to do it, but there are something we should really consider. And the one thing we should consider is the transportation, and one of the other things we really need to consider is how much biomass can we allow ourselves to do. We looked upon that in a project we did some years ago where I had this CESA project here that involved most universities in Denmark, and what we found is that from transportation, the more direct use of electricity we can do, the better. Electric vehicle, electric trains, even electric planes, if we can make it happen. The more we can do that, the better. But by the end of the day, there will be international aviation, international shipping, big trucks, and so on that we cannot do this way. So somehow we need to produce some kind of carbon, hydrogen fuels for that, or it could also be ammonium with nitrogen instead. So that's, and what we then analyzed here is, on one hand, and then on the other hand, if we take the biomass issue, can we find enough biomass to do this? And in our finding, not if we should claim it to be sustainable, then we cannot do that in Denmark, nor anywhere else. So how will we deal with this dilemma here? We need some carbon or something for the transportation, but we do not have biomass enough. The solution we ended up with is very much in line with the solution that Christian Breyer presented and many others later on. That is, somehow we need to do some technologies where we take carbon from biomass as long as it is sustainable, and add then by electrolysis some hydrogen we can get from the wind and the PV, and then we can produce something we can use for the transport sector. When we analyze this and use everything we think is sustainable biomass, we still don't have really enough. By the end, depending a little bit on the scenarios, somehow we will have to take some carbon or nitrogen from somewhere else, take it from the air or some source, or by carbon capture or something. We don't wish to do that because it's so much more expensive to do it. So that is something we do as the last option. In the book, and we have made a lot of these diagrams here on how to go from the 100% renewable source and then to the transport. I will not go into details, but just say that all of them have the element that I just mentioned here, that somehow we need to take some electrolysis, hydrogen produced on wind and solar, and then add it in order to be able to get enough fuel to operate the transport sector. And the point here is, if we accept that, not because of the wind turbines or the PV, but because we wish to convert also the transport sector into 100% renewable energy. Because of that, we have to take some wind PV by electrolysis, hydrogen, and then into the transport sector. If we accept that, and we accept the losses in efficiency by doing so, then we get for free an option. And that option is, instead of storing the wind and the PV while it's electricity, we can wait. If we are willing to invest in some overcapacity, then we can wait and then we can store it as hydrogen, or even better, even more affordable, as some kind of liquid fuel or green petrol or some kind of gas, methane or something like that. And why is that important? Well, now I'm going back to what I started before, and now I take a look at the storages. Here is the storage capacity we do have in Denmark right now. And the big green one, that is the liquid fuel storage we have. That's all the oil tanks. The yellow one is our 2 big natural gas storages. If you have good eyes, you can see a small red one. Maybe not on the back row, but here on the front you can see a small red one. The small red one is when I take all the heat tanks for hot water in all the houses and add all the thermal storage we have in our district heating system, and add the thermal storage of the district heating itself, and add all the new seasonal storage we have built in connection to solar heating, and add it all up, then I get this small red one here. In principle, I should also have the electricity storage, but then even those of you with very good eyes and glasses could not see it, so it's not really here. I've sometimes heard people say, when we go to renewable energy, we need a lot of storage. To be a little provocative, I sometimes answer back, no, we don't need any storage. We have all the storage we need. We have plenty of storage. What we need is not storage. What we need is access to this storage. Because we don't have now is access to the storage we already have. We do not have those electrolyzers we need to get here. We do not have the methanation and all that thing installed yet. And we do not have all the heat pumps that could take us to the better use of the thermal storage. Now, please look at this diagram and focus on the small red one there, and then I'll slip and then see the small changes I'll make here. This is when we calculate Denmark hour by hour, including transportation and electrolysis and heat pumps and everything, and go to 100% renewable energy, and we identify what do we need in storage capacity. And as you may, I'll just flip it back like that, and then go up here again. You can see we have liquid storage, we have the gas storage, we have added a little hydrogen storage, but that's more temporary. So we have a little more flexibility, and then we like to get that hydrogen into a form that we can store it as gas or liquid fuel. Maybe you could saw the small red one increased enormously. Still, it's small compared to the others, but increased a lot. We should have more thermal storage, and we can do a lot of flexibility, and it's relatively cheap. Then you can see also jumped in a little tiny dark blue one here to the right. And that is if we convert all cars in Denmark to electric cars, this is the storage capacity we will have there. I don't think we should do that in order to integrate wind, because that'll be way too costly. But I think it's a very good idea in order to make transportation operate on renewable energy, direct electrification. Very, very good, very urgent, and something we definitely should do. And if we're doing it for that reason, if we are paying for all those electric cars, they're quite expensive, including the batteries and so on, if we do that, we might as well use it to gain some flexibility, and of course we can do that. So this is the result we end up with if we look at Denmark. We have tried to calculate the same results for the whole of Europe, coming more or less to the same conclusion. if we can find, of course, all the places to put all those wind turbines, we need to do that. We still limit ourselves into sustainable biomass. By the end, we need a little carbon capture in order to do it, to get rid of the last part of the natural gas, but it's also doable on the European level, and again, we can also do it with reasonable, affordable storage. Now, we compared that scenario to the recent one that was issued by the European Commission called A Clean Planet for All, where there are different scenarios in it, and this is scenarios that it's going to totally decarbonize the European level, and we can see it's the same kind of solution where you have the electrolyzers and so on and so forth. We also try to, or are trying right now to replicate these calculations, and we can see when we put it into our hourly models, there's something that we can have to discuss if there's capacities enough and things like that. But one thing we can see, unfortunately, is that the European, in this scenario, is underestimating the potential by district heating to recycle excess heat and get a more efficient system. But that is just good, because then we can add that to it, and then it will become even more doable to do it. Now, I will turn my head to Aalborg, because bringing all this I just mentioned here back to Aalborg and to our city council, what can we then say to them? What should we do in Aalborg in order to do it the best way? First of all, 10 years ago, when we did this study, we actually did something. We was not so reflective about it. It was not so explicit. But this time we've been very explicit on formulating a guiding principle. And this guiding principle is telling us in Aalborg, or any other town or city or country or region or island for that matter, this is the guiding principle, is telling us that the idea of us in Aalborg to go to decarbonizing, to the green transition, to 100% renewable energy, the guiding principle of this is that we should play our role in Denmark doing the same, or Europe, or by the end of the day, the whole world doing the same. This should be our guiding principle. When we ask ourselves, how should we include this? What should we do about that? And because it wouldn't make any sense that in Aalborg we define ourselves as an island and just close ourselves and use whatever we have. But this is the guiding principle we try to apply. This is then something to do with how should we define sustainable biomass in Aalborg? How much can we use? How should we do all the transportation, all the questions I just raised in the beginning? How should we handle our big cement industry? How should we balance the electricity? How much should we start investing in batteries or anything similar to that? So what we have done is that we have tried to look what is the biomass use and what could be sustainable biomass. And in Denmark we have started to use a lot of biomass, but maybe it's not sustainable, all of it. So we are looking at this survey that is also in the paper I just mentioned before about Smart Energy Europe, looking at different surveys of what is sustainable biomass. As we also discussed in the panel debate earlier this week, sustainable biomass is something we will debate, have been debating, are debating, will be debating exactly where and how it is. But the principle is for us that in Aalborg, we can not just, if we happen to be having a lot of biomass or not, we can just allow ourselves to do that. We have to limit ourselves in Aalborg to only use our share of what is sustainable biomass in Denmark, in Europe, by the end of the day, in the world in general. And that is what we have put in our scenarios. So we say we have to limit ourselves to that. It just happened to be that is more or less what we already have in Denmark, so that's not so bad. In Aalborg. Then transport. What about transport? I mean, sometimes you have this UN definition of when you decarbonize, and it's not including all international aviation and all international shipping. So who should take care of that? We have here defined the Danish and the Aalborg transport need in a way. So if all other towns and regions and countries is using the same principle and we sum it all up, then we will get the world transport need once and only once. Meaning that we are saying that Aalborg, we should also somehow produce fuel for international aviation, our share of it. Otherwise, we cannot come to the global scenarios, and we cannot give our contribution to the global scenarios in a proper way. So we should be able to do that within our limits of what is sustainable biomass. Then we apply the same for our industry. In Denmark, in Aalborg, we have a lot of small industry, and then we have one big one, that is our cement manufacturing. And if we should provide 100% renewable energy for that cement manufacturer in Aalborg alone with our share of the biomass, that will be very difficult. So here we gain on the assistance from the rest of you in this room and the rest of people in the world. So we say we will, within our share of the biomass, we will provide our share of the Danish industry or our share of industry in general. And then we will rely on the rest of Denmark to come and help us in converting the cement industry to 100% renewable energy as well. So this is the way we have said to all our politicians that this is the way we could do our strategy. And then we have started to calculating how much wind and PV should we then have, because that could be interesting to see on the faces on the city council members when they hear these numbers, if this is doable, and they want to face the voters saying we need so many wind turbines and so many PV in Aalborg. And here we also asked ourselves, how much wind should we have? How much PV should we have? That is a debate going on in the municipality. And they asked us, should we allow, there's a lot of people who wish to build PV on all the fields. Should we allow for that? Because we also need to grow some food some places. And how much wind and how much PV should we have? We could then answer them back calculating on Aalborg, what we have already calculated in general on the national level, and coming to the result that in our parts of the world, it should be a little thing like 20% of the electricity should come from PV and 80% from wind. In capacity, that is more or less the same under the Danish circumstances. The megawatt will be more or less the same. This is a good mix. This will make the least cost. It will also make the least burden on the distribution grid in the electricity system, which is also very important. So this is what we could report back to them. This is how you could do it. And then we could describe how we could change the current situation. Here based a lot of fossil fuels, coal coming into our coal-fired power station and fuel to the transport as we have it. And then to a situation like this where we have a lot of wind and a lot of PV and limit ourselves to sustainable biomass use, but also give our contribution to producing liquid gas and liquid fuel for the aviation, the Aalborg part also of the international aviation. Now I will turn my head to some of the results that we could see at the local level that bring some knowledge to the global level that we already start discussing. One of the things we very often discuss at the global or the national level is how to balance the wind and the PV. Should we invest in batteries? As you heard, I will say no, it's too expensive. But what should we do? We could do some more detailed analysis on that in the Aalborg case. Again, we asked ourselves, should we consider Aalborg as an island where we should balance everything ourselves? The answer is no. We are still collaborating and exchanging with the rest of Europe. There's more sun to the south, and so there's mutual benefit of exchanging. And we looked into literature, how much should that be, and we then took away that part and say, this is something that we will trade. That is a minor part of it. We can see there will be of mutual benefit, but still. And then we asked ourselves, what should we do in terms of those hours where the wind and the PV, not only in Aalborg and Denmark, but in general in Europe, is not producing enough. Those hours where we will not have wind and PV enough. What should we do there? Our best answer, at least this was our starting point, that is to build some kind of power station, some cheap capacity gas turbine, something. Of course, we should burn the green gas on it, but it will not burn many hours, so it doesn't really matter. So that is our starting point. Then we asked ourselves, where should it be? And we said, why not have the Aalborg share of that European peak power station being in Aalborg, because then we can utilize the heat for district heating. Why not? So that's what we put up as a benchmark starting point. And then we started to playing around with it. So we have some imbalances. They are shown as some big blue imbalances. You can see them here from the left to the right. That is how much electricity, the blue one describes how much electricity do we produce at certain hours where we cannot use it. We can curtail it or somehow. It's an imbalance. The orange one is the one where we cannot produce the power ourselves. You can see that's very small, and it's small not to zero, but to the level in which we can see there's a mutual benefit of exchanging it with regions outside Aalborg. And then the first thing we can do, that is the easy part, that is to operate the heat pumps we have in the system in a smart way. So when there's a lot of wind going on, then we turn on the heat pump, and when there's little wind, we turn off the heat pump. And then we store the heat in a thermal storage that is so much cheaper and so much more affordable than the electricity storage, and then we can actually bring it down quite a bit. The next thing we can do is to smart charge the vehicles. Charge them when the wind is blowing, stop charging them when the wind is not blowing. That can also bring it down. Those things are easy and almost no costs go with it. It's almost a free way to go. Then after doing that comes the more difficult part, because we have not been able by this cheap options to bring it down to a reasonable level. So the next question is, should we then in Aalborg start building batteries or do something in order to balance this better, or shouldn't we? And if we should, what should we do? And this is where we then started to make an economic analysis where we say, now we can benchmark it. We have an option. We can just build more wind turbines and PVs and throw away, curtail it, throw it away. Then, of course, we have to invest in a little more wind turbines and PVs. Or we could build a little less wind turbines and PVs and then somehow store it or make it more flexible so we somehow take it in when there's too much and bring it back when there's too little. The wonderful thing about this from a feasibility point of view is that we can weight investments against investments. So we can see what will be the better thing to do. The first thing we did then was to put in a battery. As I already mentioned, we don't believe this will be too expensive, but we just, for the sake of the calculation, we brought in a battery. Now, bringing in a battery at this point in balancing will not work very well, because you really have to store a lot of energy, and it will take a lot of time before you can discharge your battery. It's a lot of energy that you have to bring long distance in time. And when we sort of calculated the battery, well, from a technical point, it's wonderful, because not only can we build a big battery and take in all the excess production, we can also get rid of the gas turbine peak load power station I just mentioned that we built. We can totally get rid of it because we have the battery that can bring it back. So the battery, from a technical point of view, is wonderful. The problem comes when you calculate the cost. Then it's a terrible solution, really terrible. I mean, when we compared the cost of that battery to the total cost of what we were doing, almost in order of magnitude doubled the total cost. This is how expensive a battery will become for that purpose. We should still have them in the cars, and there can be many other purposes around, but for that purpose, for balancing, I don't find the battery suitable. And even if the price was so much lower as Christian Breyer predicted it would be in the future, it's still way beyond what is feasible. Then we tried another thing we could do in Aalborg. We could build a stone high temperature steam storage. So we could heat up that steam and put it into high temperature storage whenever there was excess electricity. We could easily do that. The problem is how to get use of it, and then in order to get use of it, you somehow need a steam turbine. So we have to add a steam turbine to the gas turbine we just built, or adding cost so that we can also use the steam. This solution, the investments in doing that compared to the investments in just building a little more wind turbines, it's yes or no. You could do it, you could do not. It's more or less the same. So we concluded, we said, yes, this is good for further research. So let's put it there. And then we thought a third option we could do, that is to increase the electrolyzers a little bit, not producing more hydrogen for the transportation than we needed, but producing it at certain other hours, so increasing the capacity of the electrolyzers. That was the most feasible solution we could find. And that is the solution, coming back to the smart energy system that I mentioned in the beginning, where you find a solution in which you store it, in this case, in hydrogen and gas storage, and not in the rest. I feel that I have to come to a conclusion, which is very good. I can just briefly mention here that we then calculated how much PV should we have, and we could actually find that, and the politicians was pretty satisfied. And we also made an ambitious plan for the politician, how much wind and where it should be, but that's certainly also doable in Aalborg. But I'll come to a conclusion now. I'll just mention that if you wish to know more and discuss more details, of course we'll have some questions now, but there's also the option that you can go to Aalborg yourself. We have a conference there on smart energy system next year on the 6th and 7th of October, and we will also take tours out to take a look at some of the installations. So if you feel like it, please come to Aalborg, save the date. Next year, you will all be very, very welcome. Thank you very much for your patience.
Professor Lund, thank you very much for excellent lecture and very interesting lecture.
You can have this one. Okay.
Thank you. Again, thank you very much, Professor Lund, for excellent lecture and very interesting. Now we expect many questions. Please, questions. Professor Urbanov is the first.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask your opinion in the light of what you presented. what would be the most intermediate or the most significant challenge in terms of research and development to move to the goal? For example, I can imagine, say, transportation is mostly fuel-based and it's difficult, especially for flights. Or you can have the overall chain from extracting resources to the use, having about 2/3 of losses of energy.
Should we have more, or should I take this one first? I'll take this one first. Of course, this can be a very long answer. What is the most urgent thing to do? In Denmark, we have put ourselves on a little bit of pressure because we have this government saying that we should actually do the 70 decarbonization already by 10 years. So we are under pressure now, so we are really looking. In general, a lot of what we suggest here is technologies we have in hand. It's insulating the houses, it's building pipes, it's building wind turbines. This is something we know how to do, and this can bring us very, very, very long. But where do we have the stops? I mean, one of the things we should really start doing in Denmark, if we wish to, is doing something with the transportation. We should start now. Started building electrolyzers and starting to make this transition here. We already have the biogas, as I mentioned, but to boost the biogas with hydrogen so we can make more out of it in the carbon, that is something we should really do. Some of the technologies that I hope we had better is technologies such as gasification. We have known that technology for many years and many papers about it and so on. But it's not really commercial. We cannot really buy that kind of technology in Denmark. We have plants that is producing gas, but somehow bringing some of the biomass to syngas and on from that point is something we are lacking. Of course, there's electric cars. They are coming on now, hopefully, and some people expect them to decrease in price, so hopefully that will be right. But for now, they are pretty much more expensive. So that is also some of the technologies. And I only address technologies now. There's also all the how to do it from a political administration point of view and barriers and human behavior. So there's a lot of things. I think there's plenty of work for all of us for now. I will stop here and see if there are more questions.
I had a question beforehand, but can I? I wanted to ask about the nuclear fusion power plants, not the fission, but the fusion power plants. Because, for example, the UK wants to invest on building such a power plant. And I wondered how is it in Denmark, because Denmark is a rich country which can actually invest on this.
So was it the nuclear in general, or was it especially the fusion?
It is like tokamak. Do you know tokamak?
Okay, yeah. Okay. I must admit I'm a little biased here because I started as a young boy, 13 years old, fighting against the nuclear. So, and I'm still having this biased attitude towards it. But of course we discuss also the nuclear, not so much in Denmark, but sometimes we do discuss it. What I find is that if you look at cost, I mean, everything is looking bright. The wind turbines are going down in cost, the PVs are going down, the electrolyzers, the battery storage, everything is going down in cost except one technology, that is the nuclear. It's increasing in cost. Everything can be built faster and faster and faster. It takes very few years to build a big wind farm, except the nuclear. It takes longer and longer and longer to build them. Just ask Finland how long they have been building on their nuclear power plant.
Are you talking about the nuclear power plants?
Yes.
Or the fusion, I mean, the tokamak kind of fusion power plants? Because for the fusion power plants, if something happens, the reactor just shuts down. It doesn't, it cannot cause a nuclear disaster, basically.
Okay. Then I will say, put it in the following way. I can see the wind turbines. I can buy the wind turbines. We can produce the wind turbines. We can put them up. We know the price. We don't know the price of fusion nuclear. If it will be developed and it can produce and somebody can deliver it and we know how long it will take and we know the price, then we can consider it. Until then, I don't see any reason why we should put a lot of effort into it.
Hrvoje Stančin, University of Zagreb. You mentioned that the decarbonization of industry will be one of the most challenging tasks. So my question is, what do you think? That will electricity or synthetic electrofuels, alternative fuels prevail in this? Because, for example, in 7 kilners, which are temperatures up to 1500 degrees, this is quite challenging to electrify. And so, in general, I would like to hear your opinion on what do you think, will electricity prevail or synthetic alternative fuels, and also why? Thank you.
I'm not sure I got the question. Was it about industry in general? Or specific?
In industry, especially those high energy demanded processes like 7 kilners where the temperature can go up to 1500 degrees. This is quite challenging to electrify.
Absolutely. I think this whole field of what to do with the industry is under-researched. And I was very happy about the keynote we had the other day about it. And I also see more and more presentations coming up, and there's a lot of options in there because it's not only dealing with some energy problems, but there's also a lot of synergies in chemical factories and how to do all this sort of thing. So I think this is under-researched. What we have done in our studies, but I think we can all do better in the future. What we have done is sort of defining industrial use of energy hierarchy, sort of prioritize what should we do. If you go to the Danish case, much of what we do in the industry is low temperature. You could do that with district heating and cooling machines and so on. Then, of course, there's something that is not low temperature. Then you have to get some kind of fuel. In some factories, we produce glass, for example, in Denmark. You need some kind of gas. But that's a very minor part of it. In other industries, you may be able to do more electrification. For example, in steel industry, if you go from producing new steel more to reproduce and recycle steel, then it's also easier to do with electricity. So, in the Danish case, we have listed all the different processes we have and allocated specific fuels for them. But by the end of the day, many of them are easy to deal with in Denmark. But I know, of course, we have cement industry and so on, but there are also other things. This is one of the areas where we also wish to be able to do better in our analysis.
Professor Duric.
I have 2 questions. One is coming from Doha, from IPCC meeting directly. I've got it on WhatsApp. They're watching you there. What we need is a societal transformation to reach 100% renewable energy. How can behavioral changes, also including shifting demand in the transport sector, support the vision, including opportunities in urban areas in both the supply and demand sides? And I have another question, which is mine. Why don't we start asking gas to have a share of renewable gas as we did with electricity? It worked very well with electricity.
Absolutely. I'll start with the latter first then. This is also something we have debated. We have some projects in Denmark sort of looking at how should we redesign the structure of the electricity market. But we are also, from our part, said you cannot separate the electricity market from the gas market, for example, because the electrolyzer will be producing, and nobody will build electrolyzer unless you can sell your product on some kind of gas market at a higher price that we see now. And one of the ways, how can we then change that gas market so this can start happening and also have a positive influence on the wind turbines on the electricity market? And one of the things could easily be, that had been a proposal from our part, that is to say, well, a certain share of what you buy of gas should be green gas, and then you can raise that share as you go. That will work very well in the Danish system, because right now we are in many places are at a point where we are paid back for all the distribution grids, so the gas price is for distribution cost going down, so that could easily be a way to do that. So yes to that one. The other question, if I got it correctly, it was the whole social reconstruction of how we can do all this. I think this is an interesting case, but I'm also here a little bit more optimistic than I used to be. Again, now I'm just looking at the Danish case, bringing it, but I think we can still learn of it. I mean, just that we in Denmark, or our politician, our government, likely supported by most of the parliament, said now we should really be ambitious here. We should go to that 70% decarbonization. This has actually generated a lot of activity in Denmark. Many industries, the whole society of industries have put forward their proposal on what they could do about this. The shipping industry in Denmark with Maersk as one of the biggest in the world, they are really discussing now how they could decarbonize and putting targets on decarbonizing. Together with the industry, they are discussing how they could build a lot of wind turbine and then make ammonium, as Christian Breyer also was talking about, for the ships, and then take in nitrogen. So, and calculating right now exactly how many wind turbines do you need to do that, and so on. And this is where I get a little optimistic, because when the business and the industry is starting to realize that they have to develop new areas and is starting to do that, then is where we can really get moving. Personally, I also ask myself, who should actually own the electrolyzers? If in our cement manufactory in Aalborg we should have carbon capturing, starting to produce aviation fuel, and so who should do that? Who should do the investment? And I will say that should be the natural gas companies and the oil companies, for several reasons. One, they have the money. They also have all the customers, access to all the customers of this. And they have a big problem, because they're running out of what they're usually selling. They need something else to sell. So there's a lot of good reasons for them to look into that. And I know, for example, in Odense in Denmark, it's also been discussed with one of the big oil companies to make an aviation, green aviation fuel factory there. So that's a short answer to a very long and important question. I hope it gives a little input at least.
Can I? No. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Land, for your very inspiring lecture. I'm Domenico Borello from Sapienza in Rome. I have two questions for you, if I can. First one, I know that in UK they are doing a lot of efforts in transition towards hydrogen. They have a number of projects. One is very high, it is HyNet, and they are thinking to produce hydrogen for everything, for transportation, for industry, and also for heating. That could be a very nice way for toward decarbonization. I don't know if you have an idea on this type of project and what should be your vision about this, because I found it very interesting. At the moment they are working in using steam reforming of the methane and putting the CO2 into the sea, but they have these very big projects on offshore wind, and then it could be something similar to Denmark. So this is my first question. And the second one is a little bit provocative. You told that in Denmark you don't have very high thermal demand in industries, but I wonder, in the objective of decarbonization, the Western countries should consider the costs in terms of CO2 emissions and other type of pollution related to the production of steel in India, for example. Is this Indian pollution is related to us if we are using their steel, or is related to India? Thank you.
Okay. Yes, I will try to do it as brief as I can. The hydrogen. When I hear people saying everything should be electricity or everything should be this and that, I'm always a little skeptical. And when you start, as you do, maybe in UK, I don't know the details, everything should be hydrogen. I don't think so. Hydrogen is important. Hydrogen is something that definitely should be included. But bringing hydrogen to houses for heating, I think that's not a wise decision to do, in my view. I know the gas industry is promoting that, and it's sometimes part of the European scenarios, but I think it's a bad solution. I think we should recycle waste heat from all the different processes to heat our houses. And when you sum this up and calculate how many wind turbines do you need by the end of the day, if you really want to put all that electricity into a hydrogen production, and then you need many, many, many more wind turbines than if you do direct electrification of the cars, of the trains, and things like this. So I think hydrogen is an important carrier, but it should play its role in the system. And the way I see the role is that it should not stay hydrogen for very long, if you can say it that way. It should be somehow put together with some carbon or nitrogen or something like that, and then we have something that we can store better, we can operate better with, and we should not do it for heating in individual houses. So that we have a recycling of excess heat that would be better. Now I forgot the other question. What was that?
About the share of CO2 related to steel industries in India.
Oh yeah, yes, and of course I recognize that there's a lot of carbon dioxide and pollution and energy embedded in projects that you import, and this has also been debated a lot in Denmark, but there's also been calculations upon it showing that Denmark also exports and import, and the West Europe also export and import. And if we also in India and other places do more renewable energy and also do more efficient production, then of course this can also be dealt with. But I agree, in principle, this should also be included in when you do scenarios. We have done it to some extent, but I'm not sure we have done it to the extent that you request here, but I accept that input.
Okay, Professor Kracic, please, one short question.
Okay, how do you see the role of digitalization in the energy planning? So it's
Okay.
Good. I can elaborate, but we also all questions. Sorry.
For Lady One.
Okay, Leif Gustafsson from Sweden. I think one crucial thing is how to define sustainable biomass use. And I think it's a lot of bias also in the discussion about bioenergy. So the question is, have you a variation of a biomass you call sustainable biomass, and what does it mean? And then we could see a lot of development. If you go 5 years back, all cars should go with biomotor fuels. Now it's mostly electricity, and I agree on. Trucks might also coming on electricity and so on. Aviation partly. Sailing boats maybe it's coming and so on. You can do a lot. So that is the question. I think bioenergy could be a very good way to level out wind power and PVs in district heating system with heat pumps and so on. So I think this is some kind of a crucial assumption behind here.
Well, I answered that a little bit when we had the panel discussion as well, because, as I said, this is an ongoing discussion, and I think it should be, because it's not something we have gone to all the levels of details necessary yet. My contribution to that discussion is, when I brought people together with different views and sort of made a consensus or conclusion out of that, what I reach is the conclusion that biomass, to a certain amount or certain share, there will be sustainable biomass. That is biomass where you can see that the carbon dioxide net result is 0 or something like that, or even sometimes negative. And then beyond that point, we start to overutilize biomass, depending on the context where we are in time and world and so on, but then it's not sustainable any longer. So what I think is important for us who do the scenarios, that is sort of in principle to recognize that this point, this level is there, and keep ourselves in the scenarios in the right part of that limit. And then, of course, also reckon the discussion of exactly where that limit is will be something we need to go on debating. That's my conclusion on the status of that discussion.
Okay, excuse me, one additional question for you.
Small question. The role of municipal solid waste, of the waste in the 100% renewable and in the 80% decarbonization. Thanks.
Municipal waste, when we deal with it here, we first of all, there's some plastic in it, something that is fossil. There's also some organic material in it, and we separate that when we do the carbon dioxide emissions, so calculations and so on. Also, we wish to have as much as that into gas. Of course, recycle it first, but then when we have the amount we have left for energy, as much as possible into gas. So if we can take some of that organic and put it into biogas facilities, fermentation and so on, that is the better we can do. Then on another note, when we make our scenarios and say this is sustainable biomass we can do, then we also say to ourselves we also need materials. So actually take a part of that away and say we will make reservations for producing new materials that we cannot do on plastic and fossil fuel any longer, based on the biomass amount resource. And then in the future, if this happens and we succeed in this, then there will, in principle, by the end of the day, not be any fossil contribution in the waste any longer, hopefully. So I can say more about that, but I'll stop here.
Okay, and the last question.
Just a very short comment. I agree about your answer for the hydrogen, to bring hydrogen to homes because of obvious reasons. But there are other technologies rather than burning hydrogen for heating, like bringing hydrogen, one option, and use it in a fuel cell, and then use the electricity for a heat pump, which may be also used for cooling, plus using the waste heat. Or just bring in hydrogen electricity and use hydrogen just only for central storage.
I once discussed this very much with the founder of one of the big Danish industries in Denmark, because he wanted that solution. And I convinced him this is a bad solution. Because if you put up the energy flows of that, there is better solutions. The better solution is to use a heat pump, electricity to heat pump for the heat. Because if you produce hydrogen, you have a lot of losses. And then if you want to transport that hydrogen to the home and put it into a fuel cells, you have even more losses. And by the end of the day, if you calculate how many wind turbines you have to put up for the one solution and the other, then the heat pump is a better option. There is one drawback in what I'm saying, that is the distribution cost of electricity. If those distribution costs become so big, and you can convince me that we can have cheaper hydrogen distribution cost, then we can talk about it. But in the other way around, the heat pump is more efficient. And it's not more expensive. I mean, a hydrogen fuel cell costs more money than a heat pump.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Professor Moon, thank you very much for excellent lecture and for answers, and all of you for attendance and discussion.
Yeah. Thank you so much.